Hi, welcome to my Grimrail Depot guide. In this guide, I'll be breaking down all the abilities of all enemies you will face in a typical route in this dungeon. I'll upload the VODs seen in the video separately if you wish to see those. There isn't really much routing to do in Grimrail Depot, so I won't be making a routes video on this. Feel free to subscribe if you wish to see other guides or VODs. Just like with my previous guide, I'll be marking important or impactful mob abilities in red, and non-important, low-damaging abilities in green. Note that tooltips are not absolute in any way, as these values are for normal versions of these dungeons at level 35. Apologies in advance for the footage. Grimrail has low ceilings and narrow corridors, causing the camera to shift very frequently. It may be harder to see abilities, but I hope it's manageable. Let's begin. In this first area, you face a handful of mobs before the first boss. There are only really 3 unique mobs. The first is the Grimrail Overseer. You face a few of these, but the first pack only has one of these. He casts Mad Dash, which is a 3-second cast, which upon completion causes the Overseer to charge in the direction of their current target, the tank. Their target will be marked with a red arrow, denoting that you are being charged at. Sometimes the red arrow spawns over DPS, but when it does, they still charge at the tank in my experience. As the tank, you'll want to put your back against the wall and make them charge at the wall to avoid the pack spreading out rapidly. The Grimrail Overseer also casts Hewing Swipe, dealing damage to all players in a 7-yard cone in front of them. Because of this, the team will generally want to be standing behind the Overseers, while the tank faces them to a wall. Next is the Grimrail Technician, who pose a far greater threat. They cast 2 abilities in rapid succession, so be quick on kicks. First is 50,000 volts, which has a 2.5 second cast time. It does damage and stuns a player for 3 seconds. You'll want to interrupt this. Significantly more dangerous than a 3-second stun is their next ability, Activating. The technicians walk up to an iron star nearby, and upon finishing the 5-second cast, unleashes the star at your party. It rolls for a second before exploding, dealing an enormous amount of damage to your party. You must interrupt this. This means that technicians have 2 abilities that need to be interrupted. On Inspiring Weeks, you'll want to ensure you don't pull inspired mobs with these technicians. You'll also want to ensure that you have enough kicks and stops for all technicians you decide to pull. Lastly is the Grimrail Laborer. They aren't very impactful. They cast Haymaker, which just does good damage to their current target, a tank hit that may need to be mitigated. After defeating the Room of Technicians, Laborers, and Overseers, you face the first boss of the dungeon. There are 2 bosses in this first boss fight, Railmaster Rocketspark and Borka the Brute. Let's start with Rocketspark. He starts the fight by first casting Better Position, where he jumps across the room to gain an advantageous position to shoot the party. He will cast this a lot, so you'll need to move around a lot. He often follows it up with cast of VX-18B, Target Eliminator, where he lets loose a handful of missiles at your party. At level 15, getting hit by these one-shot us, so you'll really have to avoid these. Rocketspark casts one other ability, his ultimate, X2101A Missile Barrage. After a short delay, Rocketspark jumps up on top of a box and drops missile smoke around his position. Missile smoke obscures his position, making you unable to attack him while he is on top of these boxes. Rocketspark then begins his long cast of Missile Barrage, continuously dealing massive damage to everyone in your party. While casting this, he gains a stacking buff called Locking On, which increases his damage dealt by 10%. This deals massive damage and can only be interrupted through Borka's ability, Mad Dash. When Rocketspark is up on his box, Borka sometimes casts Mad Dash. If the tank points Mad Dash at the box Rocketspark is standing on, Rocketspark will fall off that box and get stunned for 8 seconds. While stunned in this way, Rocketspark will take 100% increased damage through recovering, so you'll want to lust after he falls down. When Rocketspark falls, he loses all stacks of his Locking On. Beside that, Borka's other ability is Slam, where they stomp the ground, dealing damage to the whole party. This Slam also interrupts any casting abilities and locks you out of that magic school for 3 seconds, so you'll want to stop casting when he does this. You'll want to kill both bosses at the same time because they enrage when the other is dead. If Borka dies early, Rocketspark devises a new plan, where he launches missiles every 0.5 seconds for the rest of the fight, dealing massive damage to your entire party. If Rocketspark dies early, Borka slips into an unmanaged aggression, increasing their damage done by 50% and attack speed by 25%. If you had to choose between which to kill first, it would probably be best to target Rocketspark, as New Plan is far more deadly than Unmanaged Aggression. Upon defeating the first boss, you now make your way up into the train cars. There are 2 Nathrezim in the path, 1 mini-boss and 1 normal Nathrezim. Kill these and move onward to climb upwards. You make your way up a set of ramps to reach the top of an area. While you climb, 2 bombardiers will constantly throw black bombs around you. Avoid getting hit by these grenades. Let the tank pick up aggro first. Aggro is a little bit touchy with these mobs, so be careful. It's safest to wait for the tank to pull both of them together. Once they stop throwing grenades, then you can safely and freely attack these mobs. Once the tank has rounded them up and they stop casting grenades, they only really cast one ability, which affects the tank. They cast Double Slash at their current target. The attack does a reasonable amount of damage and applies a bleed. However, every cast of Double Slash applies a stack of hemorrhaging wounds to the tank. This makes the tank take 10% more damage from Double Slashes and stacks indefinitely. This means this pull has a soft timer, because eventually it will become too much for the tank and healer to manage, so you must kill these rather quickly. After this pull, and a cutscene that you skip to enter the train car, you fight 5 packs of enemies before fighting the second boss. The first pack consists of 2 unique enemies. There are 3 Iron Infantries, and they are the easiest enemies in this entire dungeon. They are literally grunts. They cast no abilities and only melee your tank. However, the other mob, the Grumcar Gunner, is a much larger threat. Their only ability is Shrapnel Blast. It's a frontal, dealing damage to players in front of them. They cast it for a few seconds, and it can hit players multiple times. Each time you take damage from it, you receive a dot called Ignite, which stacks up to 5 times, which lasts for 5 seconds. This dot also makes you take more fire damage for each stack for its duration. The tank can sidestep it after they start casting, dodging most of the damage, and hopefully stepping out for a long enough time to drop the dot. The tank will need to reposition carefully to avoid pointing that frontal towards the DPS. The next pull has 2 new mobs. First is the Grumcar Grenadier. Not to be mistaken for the Bombardiers earlier. These Grenadiers only really cast Black Rock Grenade, which targets a random party member. This explodes on that target, dealing damage and knocking that player and any player within 3 yards upwards. To minimize incoming damage and DPS downtime due to the knockup, DPS will want to spread out a little. The other mob is the Grumcar Cinderseer, one of the harder mobs in this train. In week 1 of season 4, these Cinderseers cast Lava Wreath, which targets a player and silences them for 12 seconds. This effect drops if there are no other players near that targeted player. It will be removed for week 2 onwards. The Cinderseer then only really casts one ability, Flame Tongue. Flame Tongue is a 2-second cast, which drops a pool of molten fire below the tank, usually. It does damage to players, and buffs enemy attacks to deal additional fire damage. You'll want to pull these adds out of the molten fire to reduce damage. After that pack, the next pack has 2 Gunners and 1 Grenadier. We've seen them both before, but as a reminder, tanks sidestep the Shrapnel Blast and point it away from the group. And the group should also spread out lightly to minimize grenade damage from the Grenadier. The pack after that has 2 new mobs. The first is the Grumcar Boomer. Boomers cast Blackrock Mortar, which after a 4-second channel, throws a bomb at a location which travels quite slowly. Once the mortar location has been determined, it will spawn a red circle. Just step out of it. They also cast Cannon Barrage, where after a 3-second channel, they shoot a barrage of cannonballs forward for 3 seconds. Just don't stand in front of them when they cast this. They do target a random player and face them for this, so do be careful. The other mob is the Grumcar Hulk. They have an Enrage ability which periodically gains 1 stack. For every stack, their damage increases by 3%. You'll want to soothe it to reset its stacks when your tank can't handle anymore. I think 6 or 7 stacks is a reasonable number to soothe, and you should soothe every time it's off cooldown after that. This last pull is likely the hardest. There are 2 Cinderseers, 1 Grenadier, 1 Boomer, and 1 Gunner. As a recap, pull enemies out of Flame Tongue Molten Fire and don't stand in it. Spread out lightly for the Grenadier's grenades, dodge mortars, don't stand in front of cannon barrages, and sidestep Shrapnel Blast from Gunners. After that last pack, we now face the second boss, Nitrogg Thundertower. Nitrogg starts pretty harmlessly. The boss faces you alone in a very small room, and I have to emphasize how small this room is. He is an oversized grenadier. He casts Black Rock Grenade, and instead of throwing it at one, he throws it at 2 players. Just like with the Grenadiers, this does damage and knocks up all players in a 3-yard radius around them. You'll want to lightly spread out to avoid spreading this damage. He also casts Black Rock Mortar, where he turns towards the direction of a player and begins to throw bombs in that direction for 1.5 seconds. He throws the first grenade in melee, the next slightly farther than that, and farther until the cast is over. You'll want to just sidestep it. The farther you are from the boss, the more time you'll have to sidestep it. At 60%, the fight becomes far more chaotic. The boss opens up the arena, effectively opening up 3 lanes. The left and right lanes both are exposed to the elements. You will be continuously pushed backwards when you're on these lanes. If you go all the way back, you will be pushed off the platform and die. The center platform is safe from this push. The boss then enters his assault cannon and begins the second phase of the fight. While in the cannon, he spends 4 seconds reloading the cannon. Upon finishing this reload, he begins to cast suppressive fire. He rapidly shoots cannonballs at one target. Pay attention to the boss's target for reload, as he will choose that target for his suppressive fire. These cannonballs do massive damage, and interrupt its target for 1 second every time it hits you. If you are targeted by this, you want to hide behind boxes or pillars. Dead DPS do no DPS. You'll want to break this cannon to return the boss fight to normal. However, the cannon has a significant amount of health that you cannot reasonably destroy with your abilities. Throughout the fight, adds will spawn: boomers, grenades, gunners, and infantry, not unlike the ones we fought in the car earlier. In addition to that, in this phase of the fight, there will be a few cannons set around the room. These cannons can be used by players to shoot ammo dropped off by the adds. Let's talk about the adds. The gunners cast Shrapnel Blast. Don't stand in front of this cast. Upon death, they drop a Shrapnel Blast ammo. You can use it in the cannon to burn the adds with a flamethrower-like effect. Then there's the Grenadier. He casts Black Rock Grenade. Just like earlier, it's thrown at a random player, it deals damage to them, and knocks them and anyone within 3 yards up. You want to lightly spread for this. Upon death, they drop the Black Rock Grenade. You can use it in the cannon and throw grenades at the adds. Finally, the Boomers. They cast Black Rock Mortar. After a cast, they throw it, spawning a red circle. Don't stand in it. Upon death, they drop that Black Rock Mortar. You can use these mortars in the cannons to shoot at the boss's cannon. After 3 mortar shots, the boss will be brought down to 1%. You can finish this last 1% off, normally around 100k health, with your abilities. The last mob, the Iron Infantry, do nothing. Upon defeating the cannon, the fight returns back to phase 1 with more space. If you have any leftover ammo, you can use them to damage the boss. They do a reasonable amount of damage, so be sure to use them. Finish off any remaining adds, and then finish off the boss. After the boss, you find yourself in a hallway with 2 paths. Just make your way through this hallway and avoid the incoming fire. Should you touch the fire, it applies a dot on you, which will almost certainly kill you. Releasing sends you all the way to the back of the train, so if you die, wait for a resurrect. Now we come to the last trash pack of this dungeon. This room is loaded. There are 4 types of mobs, 3 of which are very dangerous. The first mob is the Gromkar Farseer. They have one dangerous ability, Storm Shield. It absorbs damage, as shields do, and upon attacking the Farseer, the shield shoots out a chain lightning, dealing good damage. You should use your interrupts for this ability, but if you miss it, as of week 2 of season 4, you are able to dispel this magic effect, so dispel it. There are 3 Farseers in this pack, so beware. The Farseers also cast Thunder Zone, a 2-second cast that forms a pool of lightning around the area. Don't stand in that. You could choose to split this room in half to minimize risk. The second mob is the Grimrail Scout, who exclusively casts Arcane Blitz. While cast, the Scout creates arcane bad circles around the area. Dodge these. Third is the Gromkar Captain. All ships must have a captain, even ones on land. This captain is the deadliest enemy in this pack, but he only really casts one ability, Reckless Slash. After a 2-second cast, he charges at a target, the tank, and inflicts a significant amount of damage to all players within 7 yards of that target. You'll want to step out of the action for a few seconds when they cast this. You will almost certainly die. Last are the Grimrail Loaders. They do not have an ability. They are grunts, filler mobs. After defeating the last enemy in that pack, you summon the last boss, who enters the room in dramatic fashion. This fight, while not mechanically complex, has the highest potential to break your ki. Wiping here will release you at the back of the train, resulting in a 60-second walk back. The first ability she casts is Freezing Snare. She throws a trap at a random player, and after a short delay it arms. Stepping on this trap trips it, dealing damage and rooting all players within 6 yards for 6 seconds. After a solid 60 seconds, these traps despawn. The next ability she casts is Spinning Spear. She turns to face a random player, and after 2.5 seconds, she throws the spear forward. This penetrates armor, dealing a significant amount of damage, and knocks the target down for 2.5 seconds. Step aside if she turns to face you. Finally, and most importantly, a dragon flies around the arena and spreads lightning. When the dragon does their dive and the boss does their voice line, everyone in the party will take unavoidable damage. On top of this unavoidable damage, the dragon drops lightning pools around the arena. You can divide this arena into 9 portions, a 3x3 grid. Periodically in the fight, the dragon will cover spots on this grid. At the start of the fight, the dragon only covers one spot at a time. Quite frequently, the second spot will be placed before the first one has a chance to disappear. So in total, during the first portion of the fight, the dragon can cover 2 out of 9 of these spots. Standing in these lightning patches applies a dot on you, a debuff that does 3 ticks of damage. As the boss's health goes down, the dragon covers more and more patches on the ground at a time, with the dragon potentially covering 4 spots at a time. This means up to 8 out of 9 spots can be covered. You must try to minimize the amount of damage you take from the lightning, and make sure that you're topped up when the dragon swoops in to deal their unavoidable damage. If possible, use a defensive occasionally to minimize this swoop damage. And that's it for this fight. There is a lot of outgoing damage, so prepare for this. Try not to take any more damage than necessary. That means actively avoiding traps and spinning throws. And there you have it, you just beat Grimrail Depot. I hope you look forward to doing the dungeon itself, as it's one of the more mechanically simple dungeons around. I know it can be intimidating playing Mythic Plus, especially if you aren't all caught up with the dungeon mechanics. I hope this video taught you something new about Grimrail Depot. I plan on making another guide for all Season 4 dungeons too, so be sure to subscribe if you want to catch those. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next dungeon guide.